The scream that tore through the December wind was so faint that Xander Novak almost missed it entirely, but something in that desperate sound made him rein in his mare and listen with every fiber of his being. He had been riding the high country trail outside Fairplay, Colorado for 3 days straight, checking fence lines on the sprawling Thompson Ranch where he worked as head wrangler, and the bitter cold of 1883 had turned the landscape into a frozen wasteland of white. The temperature had dropped so viciously in the past weeks that even the hardiest ranchers were losing livestock, and Xander had seen more than one family packing up to head to lower country until spring thawed the mountain passes. But that sound, that terrible cry that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, made his blood run colder than any blizzard ever could. He sat perfectly still on his horse, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air, and waited. The wind howled through the pines, bending their snow-laden branches until they creaked and groaned. But beneath that natural symphony he heard it again. A voice, a woman's voice, thin and desperate, calling out words he could not quite make out. Xander's jaw tightened as he turned his mare toward the sound, urging her through the deep drifts that had piled up against the tree line. He knew this country, like he knew his own reflection, had ridden every trail and explored every valley since he was a boy of 10, following his father, who had worked these same ranches before a falling tree claimed his life 5 years back. The voice grew louder as he approached a ramshackle homestead that sat in a small clearing, nearly buried under snow. Xander recognized it as the old Brennan place, though he had heard that the man who owned it now was named Porter, a surly character who kept to himself and made it clear he wanted no visitors. The main house was dark, its windows shuttered against the cold, but smoke rose from the chimney in thin wisps. What caught Xander's attention, however, was the barn that stood about 50 yards from the house, its walls weathered and gray, its roof sagging under the weight of accumulated snow. The cry came again, and this time Xander was certain it originated from that barn. He dismounted, his boots sinking into snow that reached past his knees, and made his way toward the structure. The barn doors were secured with a heavy chain and padlock, and when he pressed his ear against the frozen wood, he heard movement inside, followed by another cry that was unmistakably a plea for help. "Hey!" Xander called out, his voice rough from days of riding in the cold. "Can you hear me? Are you trapped in there?" The movement inside became frantic, and then a voice, hoarse and weak but distinctly female, responded. "Please, please help me. He locked me in here. I cannot get out. Please." Xander's hands curled into fists as rage flooded through him. He had seen plenty of cruelty in his 30 years of life, had witnessed things during his time drifting through the territories that would haunt him until his dying day, but the thought of someone imprisoned in a barn during the worst winter Colorado had seen in decades made his stomach turn. He examined the padlock, saw that it was new and heavy, the kind that would take a blacksmith's tools to break, and made a decision that might cost him dearly. "Step back from the door," he shouted, pulling his rifle from its saddle holster. "I am going to shoot the lock off. Get to the far wall and cover your head." He waited until he heard the rustle of movement retreating deeper into the barn, then aimed carefully at the padlock's shank and fired. The shot rang out across the frozen landscape, echoing off the mountains, and the lock shattered into pieces that scattered across the snow. Xander worked quickly to unwrap the chain, his fingers clumsy in his thick gloves, and when he finally hauled the barn door open, the sight that greeted him made his breath catch in his throat. A young woman stood in the dim interior, wrapped in what appeared to be every piece of cloth and burlap she could find, her face pale and gaunt, her lips cracked and bleeding from the cold. Her eyes, a startling shade of green even in the weak light, were wide with a mixture of hope and terror. She was shaking so violently that she could barely stand, and when she took a step toward him, her legs gave out entirely. Xander caught her before she hit the ground, feeling how light she was, how her body trembled uncontrollably against him. "I have got you," he said, his voice gentler than he had intended. "You are safe now. I have got you." "He will kill you," she whispered, her words slurred from cold and exhaustion. My stepbrother. He will kill you for this. Let him try, Xander replied grimly. He looked around the barn and saw that she had been living in conditions no animal should endure. A thin pile of hay served as her bed, a bucket of frozen water sat in one corner, and scraps of what might have been food were scattered near an overturned crate. There was no stove, no heat source of any kind, and the temperature inside the barn was barely different from the killing cold outside. How long have you been in here? Since October, she said, and then her eyes rolled back, and she went limp in his arms. Xander did not hesitate. He carried her to his horse, wrapped her in his own heavy coat, and lifted her onto the saddle before mounting behind her. He held her against his chest, trying to share what warmth he could, and urged his mare into a gallop back toward the Thompson ranch. The main house was still 3 miles away, and every second counted. He could feel how cold she was, how her breathing came in shallow gasps, and he knew that if he did not get her warm soon, she would not survive. The ranch house appeared through the swirling snow like a beacon, its windows glowing with lamplight, smoke pouring from its chimneys. Xander did not bother with the barn or the proper protocols. He rode straight up to the front porch, dismounted with the woman still in his arms, and kicked at the door until it flew open. Mrs. Thompson, the ranch owner's wife and a woman Xander had known since childhood, took one look at the scene and sprang into action. She was in her 50s, her hair more gray than brown these days, but she moved with the efficiency of someone half her age. Bring her to the back bedroom, she commanded. Daniel, fetch Dr. Morrison from town. Tell him it is an emergency. You other boys, heat water and bring every blanket we have. Xander carried the woman to the bedroom Mrs. Thompson indicated, a small but warm room with a fire already crackling in the hearth. He laid her on the bed gently, and Mrs. Thompson began removing the frozen, filthy layers of cloth that covered her. Xander turned away to give her privacy, but Mrs. Thompson called him back. Stay, she said firmly. I may need help, and you are the one who found her. She may want you here when she wakes. Over the next hour, Xander watched as Mrs. Thompson and two of the ranch hands' wives worked to warm the woman slowly, wrapping her in blankets, placing heated stones near her feet, spooning warm broth between her cracked lips. Dr. Morrison arrived as the sun was setting, a craggy old man who had been tending to the people of Fairplay and the surrounding ranches for 30 years. He examined the woman thoroughly, his expression growing darker with each passing moment. Frostbite on her toes and fingers, but not severe enough to require amputation if we are lucky, he said finally. Malnutrition, dehydration, exposure. Another day or two and she would have been dead. Who did this to her? She said her stepbrother locked her in a barn back in October. Xander replied, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. The Porter place, about 10 miles northeast of here. Dr. Morrison's eyebrows rose. Martin Porter. I heard he took over that homestead after old Brennan died. Nasty piece of work. Has a reputation down in Leadville for being a cheat and a drunk. He looked at the woman again, his expression softening. She must be the stepsister he brought with him. I heard rumors in town that she had run off, but I see now that was a lie. What can we do? Mrs. Thompson asked. The law? The nearest marshal is in Leadville, and the passes are closed until spring, Doctor, Morrison said. Even if we could get word to him, Porter would just claim she was being punished for some transgression. And you know how the law looks at family matters. Best thing to do is keep her here, keep her safe, and deal with Porter if he comes looking for her. Xander felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. He will come looking, he said quietly. Men like that do not let go easily. Then we will be ready, Mrs. Thompson said, her voice brooking no argument. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she ran the Thompson ranch with an iron will and a keen mind. Her husband might own the land, but everyone knew who really kept the place running. She stays here as long as she needs to, and if Martin Porter shows his face, he will find out what Colorado hospitality really means. The woman, whose name they discovered was Clara Brennan, When she finally woke late that night, spent the next 3 days drifting in and out of consciousness. Xander found himself checking on her constantly, making excuses to pass by her room, lingering in the hallway to listen for any sound that might indicate distress. He told himself it was simple human decency, that anyone would feel protective of someone they had rescued from such horrific circumstances. But he knew there was more to it than that. When Clara finally opened her eyes and stayed awake for more than a few minutes, it was late afternoon, and snow was falling again outside the frosted windows. Xander had been sitting in a chair by her bedside, whittling a piece of wood without any real purpose, and when she stirred, he immediately set his knife aside and leaned forward. "Easy," he said softly. "You are safe. You are at the Thompson Ranch. Do you remember? I pulled you out of the barn." Clara's green eyes focused on him with an intensity that caught him off guard. She studied his face as though memorizing every detail, from the scar that cut through his left eyebrow to the stubble that darkened his jaw. "You are real," she whispered. "I thought perhaps I had dreamed you." "I am real enough," Xander replied with a slight smile. "How are you feeling?" "Warm," she said, and tears suddenly spilled down her cheeks. "I am so warm. I did not think I would ever be warm again." Xander felt something crack open inside his chest. He reached out without thinking and took her hand, which was still bandaged from the frostbite, but healing well, according to Dr. Morrison. "You are safe now," he said again. "No one is going to hurt you here." Clara's fingers tightened around his. "You do not understand. Martin will come for me. He will not let me go. He needs me." "Needs you for what?" Xander asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "My father's land," Clara said, her voice bitter. "When he died last year, he left the homestead to me, not to my stepmother or her son. But the deed is in Martin's possession, and he has been trying to force me to sign it over to him. When I refused, he locked me in the barn. He said I could come out when I agreed to give him what was rightfully his." She laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "He brought me food once a week, just enough to keep me alive. He said the cold and hunger would change my mind eventually." Xander felt rage burn through him, hot and pure. "He isn't getting you back," he said flatly. "I do not care what he thinks he is owed. You are not going back to that place." "You do not know him," Clara said, fear creeping into her voice. "He is dangerous. He has killed men before. He bragged about it, said no one would ever believe a woman's word over his." "Then he has not met anyone from the Thompson Ranch," Xander replied. "We have dealt with plenty of dangerous men. Martin Porter does not scare me." Over the next weeks, as January deepened and the snow continued to fall, Clara slowly regained her strength. Mrs. Thompson and the other women on the ranch took her under their collective wing, providing her with proper clothing, nutritious food, and most importantly, kindness. Xander watched her transform day by day from the terrified, skeletal woman he had pulled from the barn into someone who could smile again, who could laugh at the jokes the ranch hands told at dinner, who could look out at the snow-covered landscape without flinching. He also found himself spending more and more time in her company, inventing reasons to be near her. He taught her to play cards on long winter evenings, sitting across from her at the kitchen table while Mrs. Thompson knitted by the fire and pretended not to notice the way they looked at each other. He told her stories about his life, about growing up on these ranches, about the places he had seen during the years he spent drifting before returning home. Clara, in turn, told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her mother's death when she was 12, about her father's remarriage to a woman who brought a grown son into their home and proceeded to make Clara's life a quiet misery. "My father did not see it," Clara said one night as they sat together in the parlor, the house quiet around them. "He was so lonely after Mama died, and he wanted to believe he had found someone who could make him happy again. But she only wanted his land, and Martin wanted it even more. I think they were planning all along to get rid of me somehow. The barn was just Martin's solution when I refused to cooperate. Your father would be proud of how strong you have been, Xander said. He was sitting close enough to her that he could smell the lavender soap Mrs. Thompson had given her, could see the way the firelight turned her hair, now clean and brushed, into shades of honey and gold. Not many people could have survived what you went through. I survived because you found me, Clara replied, meeting his eyes. I had given up. I was so cold that last day, and I knew Martin was not coming back until the following week. I knew I would not last that long, but then I heard your horse, and I found the strength to scream one more time. She reached out and took his hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. You saved my life, Xander. I am glad I was there, Xander said quietly. He looked down at their joined hands, at the way her fingers laced through his, and felt his heart hammer against his ribs. He had known he was falling for her for days now, maybe from the very first moment he had seen her in that barn, but saying it out loud felt too large, too risky. She had been through so much trauma, had nearly died, and the last thing she needed was a cowboy she barely knew declaring feelings she might not return. But Clara, it seemed, had no such hesitation. I think I am falling in love with you, she said, her voice steady despite the flush that colored her cheeks. I know it is fast, and I know I should probably wait and be more careful about my heart after everything that has happened. But life is short, Xander. I learned that in the barn, and I do not want to waste time pretending I do not feel what I feel. Xander felt as though the world had tilted on its axis. He stared at her, at this woman who had survived the unsurvivable, who had found the courage to speak her truth even when it would have been easier to stay silent, and knew that he was lost. I have been falling for you since the day I heard you scream, he admitted. I did not think I believed in that kind of thing, love at first sight or fate or any of it. But then I found you, and everything changed. Clara smiled, a real smile that lit up her entire face, and Xander could not help himself. He leaned forward and kissed her, gentle and careful, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But she did not pull away. Instead, she kissed him back, her hand coming up to cup his jaw, and for a long moment, the rest of the world ceased to exist. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara laughed softly. Mrs. Thompson is going to have thoughts about this, she said. Mrs. Thompson has been giving me knowing looks for weeks, Xander replied with a grin. I think she will be pleased. Their happiness, however, was short-lived. 2 days later, on a bitter morning, when the wind howled down from the mountains with a fury that rattled the windows, Martin Porter arrived at the Thompson Ranch with 3 men backing him up. Xander was in the barn when one of the younger hands came running to find him. That Porter fellow is here, the boy gasped. He is demanding to see Mr. Thompson and saying something about his sister being stolen. Xander's blood ran cold. He grabbed his rifle and headed for the main house, where he found Mrs. Thompson standing on the porch with her own shotgun cradled in her arms. Martin Porter sat on a large bay horse in the yard, flanked by 3 rough-looking men who had the appearance of hired guns. Porter himself was a tall man in his 30s, with a hard face and cold eyes that swept over the ranch with obvious disdain. I am here for my sister, Porter announced, his voice carrying across the snow. I know she is here, and I know you have no right to keep her. She is family, and family business is not your concern. Stepsister, Mrs. Thompson corrected calmly, and she is an adult woman who can make her own choices. She has chosen to stay here. She is confused and ungrateful, Porter snapped. I took her in after her father died, gave her a roof over her head, and this is how she repays me? Running off and making up lies about being locked in a barn? He laughed, a cruel sound. I was trying to teach her responsibility. She refused to do her chores, refused to contribute to the household. A few days in the barn to think about her behavior was not unreasonable. A few days? Xander stepped forward, his voice deadly quiet. You left her there for months. She nearly died. Porter's eyes narrowed as he focused on Xander. You must be the one who broke into my property and stole my sister. I could have you arrested for that. Try it, Xander said flatly. The nearest law is in Leadville, and I would be happy to take Clara there myself so she can tell the marshal exactly what you did to her. I am sure they would be interested to hear about how you starved and froze a woman in an attempt to steal her land. Porter's face flushed with anger. That land is mine by right. Her father would have wanted me to have it. She is just a woman. What does she need land for? The deed says otherwise. Clara's voice rang out clear and strong. She had emerged from the house and now stood on the porch beside Mrs. Thompson, wrapped in a thick shawl but standing tall and unafraid. Papa left the land to me, Martin. Not to you, not to your mother, to me. And I will never sign it over to you, no matter what you do. Clara, Porter said, his voice taking on a cajoling tone that made Xander's skin crawl. Be reasonable. You cannot run a homestead by yourself. You need family. Come home and we can work this out. You locked me in a barn and left me to die, Clara said, her voice shaking with emotion but not backing down. You are not my family. You never were. And I am not leaving with you. Porter's expression hardened. Fine. But that land is still legally mine to manage until you marry or turn 30, according to Colorado territorial law. So you can stay here and play house with these people all you want, but you will not see a penny from that property, and you will not be able to sell it or work it. You have nothing without me. She has us, Mrs. Thompson said firmly, and she has a home here for as long as she wants it. Now get off my property before I decide that shooting you would be doing the world a favor. For a moment, Xander thought Porter might actually be stupid enough to start something. His hand moved toward the gun at his hip, and the three men with him tensed. But then Porter seemed to remember that he was outnumbered, surrounded by ranch hands who had emerged from the barn and bunkhouse with their own weapons, and he forced a smile that looked more like a snarl. This is not over, he said, looking directly at Clara. You cannot hide here forever, and when you finally come to your senses, do not expect me to be merciful. He wheeled his horse around and rode off with his men, disappearing into the swirling snow. The tension that had gripped the ranch yard slowly dissipated, but Xander noticed that Clara was shaking. He climbed the porch steps and put his arm around her shoulders, feeling her lean into him. You were so brave, he murmured into her hair. I was terrified, Clara admitted. But I meant what I said. I will never give him what he wants. That land is all I have left of my father. Then we will figure out a way to get it back for you properly, Xander said. The law Porter mentioned about managing the property until you marry or turn 30. How old are you now? 22, Clara said. 8 more years of Martin controlling my inheritance. Unless... She trailed off, looking up at Xander with an expression he could not quite read. Unless you marry, Xander finished, understanding dawning, which would give legal control to your husband instead. Yes, Clara said quietly, but I would have to trust that man completely. I would have to know he wanted me, not just my land. Xander turned her to face him fully, not caring that Mrs. Thompson and half the ranch were watching. I do not care about your land, he said firmly. I care about you. I would want you if you had nothing but the clothes on your back. But if marrying me would keep Porter from having any power over you, then I am asking. Clara Brennan, will you marry me? Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. We have known each other less than 2 months, she said. I know, Xander replied, but I also know that I love you, and I know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you, however long or short that may be. I am not asking because of your land or because of Porter. I'm asking because I cannot imagine my future without you in it. Yes, Clara said, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, I will marry you. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the small church in Fairplay, with Mrs. Thompson acting as witness and most of the town in attendance. Word had spread about Clara's rescue and Porter's cruelty, and public opinion had turned sharply against the man. Even the preacher, a stern Baptist who usually stayed out of secular affairs, made pointed comments during the ceremony about the sanctity of protecting the vulnerable and standing up to evil. Clara wore a simple dress that Mrs. Thompson and the other ranch women had sewn together from fabric they ordered special from Denver, and Xander wore his best suit, the one he had not touched since his father's funeral. When he saw Clara walking down the aisle, her hair adorned with winter berries and pine sprigs, since there were no flowers to be had in February, he felt his throat tighten with emotion. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was alive and free and choosing to bind her life to his, and that felt like a miracle. They exchanged vows in front of God and the community, promising to love and honor each other through whatever trials lay ahead, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xander kissed Clara with a tenderness that made several of the older women in the congregation dab at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The reception was held at the Thompson Ranch, with food and drink and music provided by a fiddler from town. Xander and Clara danced together in the great room that had been cleared of furniture for the occasion, and he held her close, marveling at how perfectly she fit in his arms. "I never thought I would have this," Clara murmured as they swayed to the music. "After everything that happened, I thought perhaps I was not meant for happiness. But then you found me and everything changed. We found each other," Xander corrected gently. "And I promise you, Clara, I am going to spend every day making sure you know how loved you are." "I already know," Clara said, smiling up at him, "but I will not stop you from trying." Their wedding night was spent in a small cabin on the edge of the Thompson property, one that Mr. Thompson had offered them as a temporary home until they could build their own place in the spring. Xander was gentle with Clara, mindful of everything she had endured, giving her control over every moment. They made love slowly, carefully, learning each other's bodies and hearts in the flickering light of the fire. And when they finally fell asleep, wrapped in each other's arms, Xander felt a peace he had not known was possible. The next months were some of the happiest of Xander's life. As winter slowly gave way to spring and the snow began to melt from the high country, he and Clara settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. She proved to be as capable as she was kind, taking on work around the ranch with enthusiasm and quickly earning the respect of the other hands. Xander taught her to ride properly, giving her lessons on a gentle mare named Willow, and Clara proved to be a natural horsewoman. "My father used to take me riding when I was a girl," she told Xander one afternoon as they walked the horses along a ridge overlooking the valley. The aspens were beginning to bud, their branches tinged with green, and the air smelled of melting snow and fresh earth. "He said I had good hands and a better seat than most men he knew. But after he remarried, my stepmother discouraged it. She said it was not ladylike." "Your stepmother was a fool," Xander said, watching Clara handle Willow with confidence and grace. "You are magnificent on a horse." Clara laughed, the sound carrying across the valley. "You are biased, husband." "Absolutely," Xander agreed with a grin. "But that does not make me wrong." Their idyll was interrupted in late April when a letter arrived from a lawyer in Leadville. Mr. Thompson brought it to their cabin one evening, his expression grave, and waited while Xander read it aloud to Clara. "It is from a man named Henry Walsh," Xander said, scanning the formal language. "He says he was your father's lawyer, and he has been trying to locate you for months. Apparently, when your father died, he left instructions with Walsh that were not included in the official will, instructions specifically about the homestead and about protecting you from your stepmother and stepbrother." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "What kind of instructions?" Xander continued reading. "Your father suspected that Martin might try to take the land from you. He set up a trust with Walsh that was to be activated if anything happened to prevent you from claiming your inheritance. The trust includes funds to hire legal representation and to maintain the property until you come of age or marry." He looked up at Clara, his eyes bright with excitement. Clara, this changes everything. Your father made provisions to protect you. But why did Walsh not contact me sooner? Clara asked, her voice trembling. Why did he let Martin do what he did? He says here that he tried to reach you multiple times, but Martin told him you had run off to St. Louis and did not want to be found. Xander replied, anger creeping into his voice. Porter lied to him, just like he lied to everyone else. But Walsh got suspicious when neighbors reported that you had not been seen in months, and he started making inquiries. That is how he eventually heard about your rescue and marriage. Mr. Thompson, who had been listening silently, spoke up. This lawyer, is he reputable? I have heard of him, Xander said. He has a good reputation in Leadville, handled some cases for the mining companies, and came out looking honest, which is rare. Then I suggest you go to Leadville and meet with him, Mr. Thompson said. Take Clara with you. Get this sorted out properly so that Porter can never threaten either of you again. The journey to Leadville took 2 days on horseback, with an overnight stop at a way station run by a friendly older couple who did not ask too many questions. Clara had never traveled much beyond Fairplay and the immediate area, and Xander enjoyed showing her the changing landscape as they descended from the high country into the valley where Leadville sprawled. The town itself was a chaotic mix of mining operations, saloons, general stores, and hastily constructed houses, all thrown together with the kind of desperate optimism that characterized Colorado's silver boom. Xander had spent time here in his younger days, working security for one of the larger mines, and he navigated the crowded streets with ease, leading Clara to a respectable boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Green. You must be the Novaks, Mrs. Green said when they introduced themselves. Mr. Walsh sent word that you would be coming. He has reserved my best room for you. She was a plump woman in her 60s, with kind eyes, and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had seen everything and was not easily shocked. Dinner is at 6, breakfast at 7. No fighting, no gambling, and no women of ill repute on the premises. We will be model guests, Xander assured her, amused by Clara's wide-eyed reaction to the bustling town visible through the boarding house windows. They met with Henry Walsh the following morning in his office above a bakery on Harrison Avenue. Walsh was a thin man in his 40s with graying hair and the sharp eyes of someone who made his living reading people and situations. He greeted them warmly and immediately began laying out the situation. Your father, Miss Clara, or I should say Mrs. Novak now, was a very careful man, Walsh said, spreading papers across his desk. He came to me about a year before he died and expressed concerns about his wife and stepson. He said he had come to believe they had married him for his property, and he wanted to ensure that you would be protected after he was gone. Why did he not just leave everything to me outright? Clara asked. Why the complexity with the trust? Colorado inheritance law, Walsh explained. If he had left you everything directly and nothing to his wife, she could have contested the will on the grounds of being unfairly disinherited. The court likely would have awarded her at least a third of the estate. Your father's solution was to leave the land to you, but to make it appear as though he was also providing for his wife through other means. In reality, those other means were minimal, just enough to avoid a legal challenge. The bulk of his estate, including the homestead and the funds he had saved, went into a trust for you. But Martin said he had legal control until Clara turned 30 or married, Xander interjected. How does that square with the trust? Walsh smiled grimly. It does not. Martin has been operating under a fraudulent claim. The will he has been citing is a forgery. I have the original here, filed with the territorial court before your father died. The moment Clara married you, Mr. Novak, full control of the property reverted to her, with you as her legal partner. Martin Porter has no claim whatsoever. Clara looked as though she might cry. So my home is really mine? Martin cannot take it? Not legally, Walsh confirmed. But that brings us to the practical problem. Martin is currently occupying the property and has been for months. Getting him off will require either his voluntary departure, which seems unlikely, or legal intervention backed by physical force if necessary. I have already drawn up eviction papers that we can present to the marshal here in Leadville, but you should be prepared for Porter to resist. Let him resist, Xander said, his voice hard. I will be happy to personally escort him off my wife's land. The process of reclaiming the homestead took longer than any of them hoped. The marshal in Leadville, a weary man named Tom Garrett, who had seen too many property disputes turn violent, insisted on doing things by the book. He served the eviction papers on Martin Porter personally, with a deputy and Xander as witnesses, and gave Porter 30 days to vacate the premises. Porter's reaction was predictable. He raged and threatened, insisted the papers were fraudulent, and swore that he would fight the eviction with every legal means at his disposal. But Marshal Garrett was unmoved, and when Porter made the mistake of putting his hand on his gun, the marshal had him in handcuffs so fast, Xander barely saw him move. You can dispute this in court if you want, Garrett told Porter as the deputy hauled him away to cool off in a cell for the night. But threatening a lawman is a good way to end up with bigger problems than losing a property dispute. I suggest you think real careful about your next move. Xander and Clara spent those 30 days in Leadville, using the time to purchase supplies they would need to restore the homestead and to make connections with local merchants who could provide goods and equipment. They also visited the property itself several times, always with the marshal or a deputy present, to assess what needed to be done. What they found was disheartening. Martin had let the place fall into disrepair, the fields overgrown, the house filthy, the barn where Clara had been imprisoned, still bearing the scars of her captivity. I do not know if I can live here, Clara said quietly as they stood in the barn doorway, looking at the space where she had nearly died. Every time I see this place, I will remember. Then we tear it down, Xander said decisively. We burn it to the ground and build something new. This barn does not define you, Clara, and it does not get to haunt you forever. Clara turned to him, tears streaming down her face, and threw her arms around his neck. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for understanding. When the 30 days were up, Martin Porter had not left. Instead, he had barricaded himself inside the house with the same 3 men who had accompanied him to the Thompson Ranch, all of them armed and making it clear they had no intention of going peacefully. Marshal Garrett, after assessing the situation, returned to Leadville to gather a larger force. This is going to get ugly, he told Xander and Clara. Porter is not thinking straight. He would rather die than admit he lost. I have seen it before with men like him. Their pride becomes more important than their lives. I do not want anyone to die over this, Clara said, looking stricken. Maybe we should just let him have it. Find somewhere else to start over. No, Xander said firmly. That land is yours. Your father worked his whole life to build that homestead, and he wanted you to have it. We are not letting Porter's stubbornness steal that from you. The standoff lasted 3 days. Marshal Garrett brought 5 deputies with him, along with Xander, Mr. Thompson, and several of the Thompson ranch hands who had volunteered to help. They surrounded the house and called for Porter to surrender peacefully. For hours, nothing happened. Then, as the sun was setting on the 3rd day, shots rang out from inside the house. But the shots were not directed at the men outside. Instead, there was a commotion, shouting, and then one of Porter's men emerged with his hands up, followed by another. The 3rd man appeared in the doorway, dragging Martin Porter, whose face was bloody and who was cursing viciously. He has lost his mind, the man said, shoving Porter toward the marshal. Started ranting about how he would burn the whole place down rather than give it up. We did not sign up for that. You can have him. Marshal Garrett arrested Porter on charges of trespassing, resisting eviction, and threatening to commit arson. As the deputies hauled him away, still shouting threats and obscenities, Xander felt Clara sag against him with relief. It is over, she said, her voice filled with wonder. It is really over. It is over, Xander agreed, kissing the top of her head. Now the real work begins. Restoring the homestead became a labor of love for Xander and Clara. They moved into the main house, which Clara insisted on cleaning from top to bottom herself, scrubbing away every trace of Martin and his mother's presence. Xander, true to his word, organized a crew to demolish the barn where Clara had been imprisoned. They tore it down board by board and then burned the wood in a massive bonfire that lit up the night sky. Good riddance, Mrs. Thompson said, watching the flames with satisfaction. She had come to help with the cleaning and had brought several other women from Fairplay with her. Some things are better off as ashes. In the barn's place, Xander and a crew of hired workers built a new structure, larger and sturdier, with proper stalls for horses and storage for hay and equipment. Clara designed it herself, sketching out what she wanted and making sure it bore no resemblance to the nightmare she had endured. They also planted new crops in the fields that spring, working side by side from dawn until dusk, their hands blistered and their backs aching, but their spirits high. Xander had never imagined himself as a farmer, had always thought of himself as a ranch hand who would spend his life working for other men, but he discovered a deep satisfaction in building something of his own with Clara. By summer, the homestead was transformed. The house gleamed with fresh paint, the fields were green with growing wheat and vegetables, and the new barn stood tall and proud against the mountain backdrop. Clara had planted a garden near the house, filling it with flowers and herbs, and she spent her evenings there, tending to the plants with a contentment that made Xander's heart swell. "I love you," he told her one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset over the mountains. "I do not think I say it enough, but I love you more than I knew it was possible to love another person." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "You show me every day," she said softly, "in 1,000 small ways. But I never get tired of hearing you say it." Their happiness was completed in October, exactly 1 year after Xander had pulled Clara from the barn, when Clara told him she was pregnant. Xander had just come in from checking the livestock when she met him at the door, her face glowing with joy and nervousness. "I went to see Dr. Morrison," she said without preamble. "He confirmed it. We are going to have a baby, Xander." For a moment, Xander could not speak. He simply stared at her, feeling emotions crash over him in waves: joy, fear, wonder, gratitude. Then he let out a whoop of pure happiness, picked Clara up, and spun her around until she was laughing and begging him to stop. "A baby," he said, setting her down carefully and immediately worrying he had been too rough. "We are going to have a baby. Clara, that is the most incredible news." "I was afraid you might be worried," Clara admitted. "It is so soon and we have so much work to do still, and I do not know if I will be a good mother." "You will be an amazing mother," Xander said firmly, cupping her face in his hands. "And we will figure out the rest. We always do." The pregnancy was not easy. Clara suffered from terrible nausea in the first months, and Xander spent many mornings holding her hair back while she was sick, then bringing her dry toast and weak tea afterward. But as the months progressed and her belly grew round with their child, Clara seemed to bloom with a radiance that took his breath away. They spent the winter preparing for the baby's arrival, transforming one of the small bedrooms into a nursery. Mrs. Thompson organized a quilting party, and the women of Fairplay descended on the homestead to create beautiful blankets and clothes for the baby. Clara cried when she saw the generosity of her neighbors, overwhelmed by how much her life had changed in just over a year. "A year ago, I was locked in a barn, certain I was going to die," she said to Xander that night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her swollen belly. "And now I have a home, a husband I adore, and a baby on the way. How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," Xander replied, feeling the baby kick against his palm. "The day I heard you scream was the day my life really began." Clara went into labor on a warm May afternoon while Xander was in the fields. One of the hands came running to get him, shouting that the baby was coming, and Xander raced back to the house in a panic. Dr. Morrison had already arrived, summoned by Mrs. Thompson, who seemed to have a sixth sense about these things, and he firmly told Xander to stay out of the way while the women handled things. Xander paced the porch for hours, listening to Clara's cries and feeling utterly helpless. Mr. Thompson, who had ridden over as soon as he heard, sat with him and shared stories about the births of his own children, trying to distract Xander from his worry. "The first one is always the hardest," Mr. Thompson said, "but women are stronger than we give them credit for. Clara will come through this just fine." Finally, as the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, Xander heard a new sound, the thin, wavering cry of a newborn baby. He froze, his heart hammering, and then Mrs. Thompson appeared in the doorway with a smile on her face. "Congratulations," she said. "You have a son, and Clara is doing beautifully." Xander rushed into the bedroom to find Clara propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the quilts the ladies had made. Dr. Morrison was packing up his equipment, looking satisfied, and when Clara saw Xander, her face lit up. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Xander approached slowly, almost afraid, and when he looked down at the baby in Clara's arms, he felt his entire world shift. His son was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists waving in the air. He was the most beautiful thing Xander had ever seen. "Can I hold him?" Xander asked, his voice rough with emotion. Clara carefully transferred the baby into his arms, showing him how to support the head, and Xander stood there cradling his son, feeling tears stream down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Clara, he is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Clara asked. "We talked about so many names, but now that he is here, I cannot decide." Xander looked down at his son, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment, about Clara's courage, about the homestead they had built together, about the future stretching out before them, full of possibility. "James," he said finally, "after your father. James Novak." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Papa would have loved that," she said. "He would have loved you." The years that followed were full and rich. James grew into a sturdy boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's stubborn determination. When he was 2, Clara gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, and 3 years after that, another son they called Henry. The homestead prospered under Xander and Clara's careful management, and they added more land, more livestock, and eventually hired workers of their own to help with the growing operation. Martin Porter, they learned through Henry Walsh, had been sentenced to 5 years in territorial prison for his various crimes. When he was released, he left Colorado entirely, and they never heard from him again. Clara's stepmother, abandoned by her son and with no resources of her own, had moved back east to live with relatives. "Good riddance to both of them," Mrs. Thompson said firmly whenever their names came up. Xander continued to work as head wrangler for the Thompson Ranch during the busy seasons, but more and more of his time was spent on his own land with his own family. He taught James to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk, and later Rose and Henry as well. He and Clara sat on the porch in the evenings, watching their children play in the yard, and marveled at the life they had built. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked him one night when the children were grown and had families of their own. They were older now, their hair touched with silver, their bodies marked by decades of hard work, but Xander still looked at Clara and saw the young woman he had pulled from that barn so long ago. "Regret what?" he asked, genuinely confused. "Taking a chance on me," Clara said. "Marrying me so quickly. We barely knew each other." Xander reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers, just as they had done hundreds of times before. "I have never regretted a single moment," he said firmly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Clara Novak." "The very best thing." Clara smiled, that same smile that had captured his heart all those years ago, and squeezed his hand. "You saved my life," she said quietly. "And then you gave me a reason to live it." "I love you, Xander. I will love you until my last breath." "And I will love you beyond that," Xander replied. into whatever comes next. They sat together in the gathering darkness, holding hands and watching the stars emerge one by one over the mountains of Colorado. Two souls who had found each other against impossible odds and had built a love that would endure for generations. The barn where Clara had suffered was long gone, replaced by something better, something filled with light and life. And though the scars of that terrible winter would never completely fade, they had been transformed into something beautiful, a story of survival, a story of courage, a story of love that began with a scream in the darkness and ended with a lifetime of happiness. Their grandchildren came to visit often, filling the old homestead with laughter and noise. James, now a successful rancher himself, brought his 4 children every Sunday for dinner. Rose, who had married a lawyer in Denver, visited during the summers with her 2 daughters. Henry, who had followed in his father's footsteps and worked as a wrangler before eventually taking over the Thompson Ranch when Mr. Thompson retired, lived close by with his wife and their 3 sons. Clara loved having the house full of family, loved watching Xander teach his grandsons the same things he had taught their fathers. She baked pies and told stories, and when the grandchildren begged to hear about how Grandma and Grandpa met, she always obliged, though she softened some of the harder details for the younger ones. "Your grandfather heard me calling for help," she would say, gathering the children around her. "And he was brave enough to rescue me, even though he did not know what he might be facing. That is the kind of man he is, the kind who does what is right, no matter the cost." "Tell us about the wedding," Rose's oldest daughter, named Clara after her grandmother, always insisted. "Tell us about the dress and the dancing." And Clara would describe that February day when she married Xander in the small church in Fairplay, when her heart had been so full of love and hope that she thought it might burst. She told them about the community that had supported them, about Mrs. Thompson, who had become like a mother to her, about the life they had built together from nothing but determination and love. As the years continued to pass, Xander and Clara settled into a comfortable rhythm. They sold off most of the livestock, keeping just a few horses and some chickens, and leased most of their land to James, who farmed it expertly. They spent their days working in the garden, taking slow rides through the countryside, and sitting on the porch watching the world go by. "Do you remember the first time we kissed?" Xander asked Clara one afternoon as they sat together on the porch swing he had built for her 60th birthday. In the parlor at the Thompson Ranch, with half the household pretending not to watch. Clara laughed, the sound still as bright and joyful as it had been when she was young. "I remember being terrified that you would think me too forward," she said. "But I also remember thinking that life was too short to waste time being afraid." "You have never been afraid of anything," Xander said admiringly. "Even after everything you went through, you faced life head on. You are the bravest person I know." "I was only brave because you gave me something worth being brave for," Clara replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You gave me love, Xander. Real love. The kind that weathers every storm and only grows stronger with time." They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The party was held at the homestead, with tables set up in the yard and food enough to feed half of Fairplay. Henry Walsh, now retired but still spry at 92, made the journey from Leadville to toast the couple who had become friends over the decades. "I have seen a lot of marriages in my career," Walsh said, raising his glass. "But I have never seen two people more perfectly suited to each other than Xander and Clara Novak. They remind us that love is not just a feeling. It is a choice you make every single day. Here is to 50 more years." Everyone laughed, knowing that 50 more years was unlikely given their ages, but the sentiment was heartfelt. Xander and Clara danced together as the sun set, moving slowly to music played by James's oldest son on a fiddle. They held each other close, and if their steps were not as sure as they once had been, their love was just as strong. That night, after all the guests had gone home and the house was quiet, Xander and Clara lay in bed together, holding hands in the darkness. "I have had a good life," Clara said softly. A life I never dreamed possible when I was locked in that barn. You gave me that, Xander. You gave me everything. We gave each other everything, Xander corrected gently. We were a team from the beginning, partners in every sense of the word. Promise me something, Clara said, her voice taking on a serious tone. Promise me that when one of us goes, the other will not give up. We'll keep living, keep loving, keep finding joy in the world. Clara, Xander started to protest, but she squeezed his hand. Promise me, she insisted. I want to know that if I go first, you will be all right, that you will keep writing, keep spending time with the grandchildren, keep telling our story. And I promise the same to you. I promise, Xander said, though the thought of life without Clara was almost too painful to contemplate. But you are not going anywhere yet. We have too much left to do. Like what? Clara asked, amused. Like watching young Clara learn to ride, like seeing if Henry's new foal turns out to be as fast as he thinks, like sitting on this porch and growing old together. Xander rolled onto his side so he could look at her in the moonlight streaming through the window, like loving you for every moment we have left. Clara smiled and touched his face with a tenderness that made his heart ache. Then that is what we will do, she said. We will love each other until the very end. And they did. When Clara passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, Xander was holding her hand. He grieved deeply, but he also remembered his promise. He continued to live at the homestead, surrounded by family who made sure he was never alone for long. He told stories about Clara to anyone who would listen, keeping her memory alive in the hearts of all who had known and loved her. 3 years later, when Xander followed his beloved wife into whatever lay beyond, his children and grandchildren gathered at the homestead to celebrate a life well lived. They buried him next to Clara on the hill overlooking the property they had built together, under the shadow of the mountains that had witnessed their love story. On the shared headstone, James had these words inscribed: Xander Novak and Clara Novak, beloved husband and wife. They heard each other's call and answered with love. The homestead remained in the family for generations, passed down from parent to child, each inheriting not just land and buildings, but a legacy of courage, resilience, and enduring love. The story of how Xander rescued Clara from the barn became family legend, told and retold until it took on an almost mythical quality. But those who had known the couple personally remembered the simple truth beneath the drama. Two people had found each other in the darkest of circumstances. They had chosen to love each other despite every obstacle, had built a life together through hard work and dedication, and had created something lasting and beautiful. Their love had not been perfect or easy. There had been hard times, disagreements, years when money was tight and the future uncertain. But through it all, they had held fast to each other, finding strength in their partnership and joy in their shared journey. And that, in the end, was the real miracle. Not the dramatic rescue or the legal battles or the triumph over adversity, though those were all part of the story. The real miracle was the everyday choice to love, to stay, to build a life together one day at a time. The miracle was in the quiet moments on the porch, the shared laughter over dinner, the comfort of a hand to hold in the darkness. The miracle was that a scream in a snowstorm had led to 53 years of marriage, that a desperate woman and a passing cowboy had become partners in every sense of the word, that from the ashes of trauma and cruelty, something beautiful and enduring had grown. In Fairplay, Colorado, old-timers still pointed out the Novak homestead to newcomers, telling them about the couple who had started with nothing but love and determination and had built an empire. The house still stood, lovingly maintained by Xander and Clara's descendants. The barn that Xander had built to replace the one where Clara had been imprisoned still served its purpose, though it now held the horses belonging to great-great-grandchildren who bore the Novak name. And on quiet winter nights, when the wind howled down from the mountains and the snow fell thick and fast, some said you could still feel the love that had been forged in that terrible season of 1883. a love that had survived the cold, the cruelty, and the passage of time itself, a love that would endure as long as the mountains stood and the rivers flowed, and people still believed in the transformative power of choosing each other against all odds. The legacy of Xander and Clara Novak was not just the land or the family they had created, it was the reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found, that a single act of courage could change the course of a life. That love, real and true and tested by fire, could overcome anything. Their story became a part of the history of fair play, woven into the fabric of the community like the thread in one of Clara's quilts. Children learned about them in school. Couples invoked their names when making their own wedding vows, and the old church where they had married kept a record of their ceremony in its archives, a testament to a love that had started in winter and bloomed into something eternal. Years turned into decades, and still the story persisted. Great grandchildren who had never met Xander and Clara grew up hearing about them, grew up knowing that they came from a line of people who chose love over fear, action over paralysis, and building over destruction. The values that Xander and Clara had lived by, the principles they had instilled in their children, cascaded down through the generations, shaping the character of dozens of people who bore their blood. And in the end, that was perhaps the greatest testament to their love. Not that it had been dramatic, or that it had started with a rescue, but that it had mattered, that it had created ripples extending far beyond their own lives, touching people they would never meet, inspiring stories they would never hear. The cowboy who heard a woman's cry and broke her out of a barn had no idea that his act of compassion would become legendary. The woman who survived unspeakable cruelty and chose to love again had no idea that her courage would inspire generations. They were simply two people trying their best to build a good life together, to honor each other and the commitment they had made, to find joy in the everyday moments that make up a marriage. But in doing so, in choosing each other day after day, year after year, decade after decade, they created something that transcended their individual lives. They created a love story for the ages, one that proved that happy endings are not fairy tales, but the result of hard work, dedication, and the willingness to hold on, even when letting go would be easier. The mountains of Colorado still stand watch over the land where Xander and Clara built their life. The town of Fairplay still thrives, though it looks quite different now than it did in 1883. But the spirit of what Xander and Clara represented, the hope they embodied, the love they shared, remains as vibrant and relevant as ever. Because at the end of the day, everyone wants to believe that love can triumph over suffering, that kindness matters, that one person stopping to listen, really listen, can change a life, that from the ashes of trauma, something beautiful can grow, that happy endings are not just possible but achievable if you are willing to work for them. Xander and Clara Novak proved all of that and more. Their love story, which began with a scream in a winter storm and ended with two elderly people holding hands as they drifted off to sleep, is a reminder that the best love stories are not the ones that start perfectly, but the ones that endure imperfectly, the ones where two flawed people choose each other anyway and build something lasting from that choice. And so their story lives on, passed down from generation to generation, a beacon of hope in a world that often seems dark and cold. A reminder that sometimes, in the midst of our own personal winters, someone will hear our cry and come to our rescue. And if we are very lucky, that rescue will be just the beginning of something extraordinary, the end.